I decided I would make one more frame modification. So let me explain to you what I did. I cut this out. All right, so yet again, you saw me cutting the frame, and as I took the engine out and looking to put the engine back in to finish up all the plumbing, I decided I would make one more frame modification. So let me explain to you what I did. So the first thing I did was I cut this out. This was the original crossmember that would normally go underneath and make room for the transmission on the LS V8. So it dips down below really the height of the lower frame of the chassis. So what I did was I replaced this bar. You see the new bar right here. I replaced it with a piece of flat bar, so now you notice it doesn't jut downwards, it's just flat and straight across and completely flat all the way under the frame. So the reason I wanted to do that was for aero, for ground effects. So I'm going to do an aluminum panel. I'm going to do an aluminum panel all the way front to back on the floor, on the underside of the chassis, to completely create a nice smooth airstream from the front of the car all the way to the back. And without this jetting out the bottom now, sticking out the bottom, I can do that. So that was the reason for a quick cutting welding expedition. I've got the rear brake line already reassembled there and riveted back into place. So that's good to go. All right, with the motor and trans out of the car again, let me show you some of the additional chassis modifications I had to make. I think I covered this in the first or second video of the build. But one difference you'll see here that I've added since is this bar. This is just a piece of angle iron. I sectioned the tube there, put the piece of angle iron, and I needed to do that to fit the transmission cooler lines. And I'll show you that in a second. And then, so I'm getting ready to just finish weld some of these, finish welding it up, and then put a coat of paint on it and have that be done. So let me show you why I had to put in that angle iron on the back of the chassis. I mentioned I was going to tell you about that. Let me do that. So here's the transmission, and basically what I had to do was modify the heat exchanger. Normally the heat exchanger bolts right here. It's I've got a couple of donut seals. One here, and then the heat exchanger would just press fit onto there. This is the transmission oil. So the heat exchanger's job, transmission oil goes in and out one side of the heat exchanger, and coolant goes in and out the other side of the heat exchanger. And basically the coolant, the antifreeze, cools the transmission oil. The other cool thing about this design is actually the coolant will heat up faster than the oil. So as the coolant heats up, it's actually heating the transmission oil at the same time, which is a pretty neat setup. So basically with this heat exchanger in place and bolted on, it was just too tall. It was too tall to fit in that transmission tunnel. And I would have had to done a lot more modifications to get that to fit. So here's what I did. You noticed, normally the stock heat exchanger here, it's just a flat plate that again press fits on top of those seals and bolts down to the transmission. What I did, where those holes are, I simply welded some -8 AN fittings, male fittings that you can see here, and ultimately I'll make this a remote heat exchanger. So this I'll mount somewhere to the side, the side of the chassis somewhere out of the way. And what I made as the head end, I took this plate. This is 1/4 inch aluminum. I cut out the exact shape and dimension on my plasma table and welded on these -8 AN fittings here. On the back side, this is powder coated. On the back side, I left 2 press fitting seal areas nice and smooth, and then this will simply bolt on like that, those 3 holes, and then the transmission oil will go in and out of there, in and out of the heat exchanger, and then I'll plumb the coolant lines in as well. So this gives me a lot more vertical clearance where that bar is. Now, even with this elbow, I actually shortened this elbow. I machined the bottom half of this elbow off to give me even more clearance, but it was still fouling on that round tube crossbar. So that's why the angle iron goes in. With that angle iron there, it all clears now and will fit. I'll show that to you once I get this all back in the car for the final time. So that was the modification I had to make to the transmission.